You know, the Sony a7R5 is one of my favorite cameras of all time. I love the handling. I love the high resolution sensor. We use it all the time for our lens testing because it's got that detail. But it's not a very fast shooting camera. It's not well suited to quick action sports and wildlife. It's very much a specialized tool. But it's already been 4 years, and now we have the successor, because here we have the brand new Sony a7R6. Now, when you look at the specs on this camera on paper, this looks like it's going to dominate not only the a7R5, but possibly a lot of the other cameras in the Sony lineup. This might be the last camera you ever need to buy. We've got a lot of questions on this. You know, this new 66 megapixel sensor, is it going to give us improved resolution, but also better DR than we saw before? With the faster scanning speeds, am I going to now have a usable electronic shutter and the ability to do fast burst rates without compromise? And is this a better video camera than what we saw before in the a7R5? We've got these questions and many more to answer. I'm Chris Niccolls. This is PetaPixel. Let's find out the answers together. So we're definitely planning on doing some buffer tests and some burst rate shooting to really see where this camera's limitations are. And for that, it's a no-brainer. We've got lots of memory cards to choose from, but we're gonna go with the OWC, the Atlas cards. The affordable Atlas Pros still give you plenty of speed and power at an affordable price, but we really like how reliable these are. We use these in many different cameras, and we've had 0 issues so far. And reliability isn't just about having a card work every single time that you put it into your camera. It's also about making sure that that card lasts over the long haul, which is why when you buy OWC cards, you get access to their excellent Innergize software. So you run this back home on your computer and it will do things like clean formats, entirely wiping the card, updating the firmware to make sure there's no compatibility issues, and also checking the health of the card over time to make sure that it's still going to be a reliable tool for your day-to-day work. You should definitely check out the OWC memory cards. Click the link in the description below and find out more today. As always, we appreciate OWC for their fast cards and for helping us make these videos possible. We appreciate your support. Let's get back to it. So we got to talk about the sensor, because this is a sensor that can possibly turn the entire world upside down, all right? So the Sony a7R6 has a 66 megapixel sensor. This could spell the end times for ever needing to buy another camera again. This is a stacked 66 megapixel sensor. I mean, this is the highest resolution full frame sensor on the market right now. And I mean, it's improving resolution over a sensor that's already incredible for pretty much any photographer existing right now. On top of that, because this is such a fast stacked sensor, it should give a faster readout speed, definitely way faster than the a7R5. Although admittedly, that was a very low bar. That camera certainly had issues if you shot electronic shutter, dealing with things like rolling shutter, harsh diagonals, things like that. This should give us the opportunity not only to get better resolution, but also be able to shoot an electronic shutter a lot more. But we're going to test that out. We're going to get results for you here very shortly. So to go along with this brand new camera, we've got a brand new processor, and that makes sense. I mean, you're going to need more computing horsepower to handle the extra megapixels here and the faster shooting speed. So we've got a Bionz XR2 processor. Despite the fact that we have probably a more efficient processor now, this camera is going to need more power. So we've also got a brand new battery to go along with it. This is the first time we've seen a departure from the Sony Z battery. We now have a Sony SA battery. Actually higher milliamp hours, 2670, but we're going to get about the same longevity out of it. So roughly 600 separated shots if I'm using the EVF and 700 if I'm using the back panel. So we're not seeing an increase or a decrease, but we do have a completely new battery type. Okay, so let's go through the body design on this camera, and I should be able to go through this pretty quickly because it's basically essentially the same as the A7R5 with just a few notable changes. But I mean, body design, the look, the feel, the button placement, dial controls, all basically identical. Even the weight, this is actually 10 grams lighter, but effectively the same weight. You do have a slightly different grip. It's actually a little bit bigger, and that's probably to accommodate a new battery, but I'm finding it's not quite as comfortable as the A7R5. It's pretty minor difference though, but it's a little bit big now for my hands. What I do like is we now have this one additional button on the top plate. This is a button illuminator. So if I push this, I actually get illumination on a lot of my main button controls. That's a really nice feature, especially for shooting in low light situations. Memory card setup is still exactly the same, twin CF Express Type A or SD cards on that. Ports, we have a small change, but it's minor, but we're now getting the twin USB-C ports. We see this on a lot of other modern cameras now, where you've got one for data transfer connectivity and another dedicated to power delivery charging. That's cool. The only other thing I'm going to talk about here is the displays. The back panel is the exact same. This is that 2.1 million dot fully articulating back panel. We love this. No need to change it. Great. The EVF is still 9.44 million dots, which is awesome, but they've actually made it brighter this time around. That's nice. This brighter screen is not only nicer to look at, but it now supports a DLCP3 color space, 10-bit HLG. This is HDR ready. Oh, and I almost forgot. They've actually put a little raised bump on the lens mount now for where your lens will actually engage. So I guess if I'm in the dark, I could feel the button here on this 70 to 200, feel this on the lens mount, and then kind of find that they're going together. There you go, click in place. It might be helpful to somebody somewhere in some situation. So it has been 4 years since the Sony A7R5, and in that time we've had some noticeable improvements in the Sony lineup that we'll now find in this camera. So first off, when it comes to automatic white balancing, we now have an IR light sensor here, improved white balancing, AI-based machine learning kind of stuff. All I wanted to do is get rid of that magenta tint that I normally get on Sony bodies, but you know what? I just use auto white balance, add a bit of amber, add a bit of green. That seems to take care of it most of the time. We also get stacking features here. I mean, this is not new. The Sony A7R5 had a high resolution mode, stacking photos up to around 240 megapixels. But due to the slightly higher resolution on this sensor, when we stack images, we should be able to push almost 270 megapixels, as well as get better noise reduction. You can also do HDR imagery. But even despite having a brand new processor, more power, you still cannot do any of this stuff in camera. You can shoot the stacks, but you still have to go home, use Imaging Edge to put it all together. And honestly, that's annoying. It's an extra step. I wish that they would do all of this in camera. And I've been complaining about this for, well, before the A7R5, so it's been a while. Okay, let's talk about autofocus, and to give you guys context, the Sony A7R5, this is the first Sony body to incorporate a new AI-based autofocusing chip, and it did a great job. I mean, I've got zero complaints. I love the real-time tracking. I love how it picks up faces, animal detect. It all works really well. On the A7R6, though, we have some tweaks here. Better processor, faster scanning sensor, that should all help, but we also have some improvements to the way that it does handle autofocus. It's going to do a better job now of picking up objects from farther distance away or smaller objects. So think picking up the person's eyes at longer distances than it normally would, or just tracking a subject out of multiple subjects even better than before. I mean, any improvement on what's already fantastic, great. I'm happy to see it. This also has a nice change when it comes to the autofocusing size of the boxes. So when I'm doing real-time tracking, sometimes I'll find the smallest box to still be a little bit large if I'm trying to get a detail like in between branches or something like that, for example. Now I can go to an extra small box, just even tighter, or an even larger box on the opposite end to cover more area. And also, if I like my zone but I want to change the shape of where it's tracking, I can now customize the size and shape of my zones. But I mean, look, as I stated before, if you're looking at any of the modern Sony bodies, you know, beyond the A7R5, they all do a fantastic job autofocusing. I basically don't have complaints. So if we're improving on what's already a fantastic system, awesome. The real issue, though, with the A7R5 was its relatively slow burst rates and inability to handle like fast action in sports. Maybe this is going to do better. Let's check that out next. So one of the big things that we're hoping is that the A7R6 is going to have a substantially better burst rates and buffer, for any sort of action sports kind of stuff. Like, in all honesty, the Sony a7R5, it wasn't exactly a slouch, okay? I mean, in mechanical shutter mode, this camera can shoot up to 10 frames per second, very respectable. In electronic shutter mode, though, that would drop to like 7 or 8 frames per second just because of the slower readout speed of the sensor. But we got to keep in mind, even in action and sports situations, these are acceptable frame rates to cover 90% of the stuff you're going to cover. And also, the a7R5 had a pretty decent buffer, which I'll talk about in just a bit. But when it comes to burst rates on the Sony a7R6, we have some big improvements, and I have to explain this a little bit. So the mechanical shutter rate is the same, 10 frames per second, but the Sony a7R6 can shoot 10 frame per second mechanical burst rates no matter what raw compression you're using. So lossless compressed, doesn't matter. You're going to get 14-bit raw files out of the lossless compressed at 10 frames per second. And this is in stark contrast to the a7R5, because when you shoot 10 frame per second mechanical shutter, that's only when using the lossy compressed format. Kind of defeats the purpose. You're losing image quality there. If you go to lossless compressed raw formats, you're not going to get 10 frame per second shooting, and that's where that real downside occurs. Now, beyond that, the Sony a7R6 will absolutely destroy it when it comes to electronic shutter mode, because this can go up to 30 frame per second burst, again, in full raw output, and you're not going to lose any bitrate. And while you're doing those high-speed burst rates, the a7R6 will maintain blackout-free shutter when you're shooting through the EVF, so it's easy to track moving subjects. But it's not just about burst rates, it's also about buffer. And the Sony a7R5 did have a pretty decent buffer. Lossless compressed format, not only do you slow down that burst rate, but you're going to get about 100 shots. Now we go to the Sony a7R6. If I did the same thing in mechanical shutter, 10 frame per second burst, but in full lossless compressed format, no quality loss there, I'm going to shoot, again, about 100 frames per second, but I'm going to do it at that faster 10 frame per second burst. So not only do we get a more usable, actual mechanical 10 frame per second burst rate without image quality loss, but we could also go up to 30 frames per second and still get about 70 shots before the buffer times out. Not bad. And again, if you're going to go to like lossy compressed, same idea. You could just go, no big deal. But how does it compare to the Sony a1 II? And for me, this is a really intriguing question, because when you see the specs on the a7R6 and then you look at their champion a1 II model, you're kind of thinking, well, doesn't this make that obsolete? I mean, they both shoot 30 frame per second electronic shutter mode. The a7R6 has higher resolution. Well, let's take a look at the buffer rate. So when you're shooting at that 30 frame per second lossless compressed burst on both cameras, as I've said, the a7R6 is going to top out around 70 frames. The a1 II can push that to about 96 frames. Not that big a difference. Remember, we're doing that at a loss of 16 megapixels per file. And then if you shoot both cameras in a lossy compressed format, well, they'll go well into the hundreds. I mean, they're going to be pretty equivalent there. So you've got these two cameras that are going to have very similar autofocusing capabilities. The a7R6 now has that new boost mode, or you can set a button to automatically go from regular speed shooting into 20 or 30 frame per second bursts. I think that's super useful for when fast action presents itself and you don't want to waste time switching between. Like, that's there. The buffer's pretty similar, like more resolution. Well, that makes the a1 II kind of a dubious proposition now that this camera exists, but we'll revisit that at the conclusion. So there's a really nice feature that I miss on the a7R5 that's now quite ubiquitous on modern cameras, but really helps enhance the ability of this camera to shoot wildlife, sports, and action, and that's having a pre-capture mode. And so this is where you can buffer up to a second before action happens. Trying it out at the zoo worked great. Watch that bird take off and then push the shutter and know that I've captured everything from a second before that moment happened. Really makes it, child's play to get the timing just right on those decisive shots. So I think we've done a pretty good overview about this camera's new features and capabilities, but we got to do a deeper dive into things like rolling shutter, how good is the actual DR on the image quality, or video capabilities, and more. So that means we got to get more locations, we got to get more samples. So we'll see you soon, we'll get to it.
All right, we're going to mix things up a little bit with the shooting location. We've actually come out to the Badlands out by Drumheller, which if you're looking for a different looking backdrop, they're actually good lands. And it's me, Jordan Drake, to talk about the video capabilities on the a7R6. And The A7R5 was a functional camera for video, but because it had that older, very slow sensor, I just felt like there were too many limitations for me to ever grab it as a dedicated video camera. But now we've got the A7R6 with a fully stacked sensor. That unlocks a ton of video potential, but I'm going to be honest with you, there was some stuff about this that I'm still pretty disappointed in. Let's talk about it. So let's start with the 8K recording that Chris is filming me in right now. And this was also available in the A7R5. It gave you the option to record up to 30 frames per second. But in the A7R5, I found this mode completely unusable because it read out at 38 milliseconds, which meant whether the camera moved or your subject moved, there were always these terrible rolling shutter jello artifacts. But moving over to this new sensor, the readout speed has moved to 17 milliseconds, which I find very usable for most types of filming. Now I have to say I was a little disappointed that there's actually a crop in this mode. It uses the central 8K 16:9 region of the sensor, but it is still a very detailed image coming out of this, and it makes the 8K recording finally truly usable. All right, so now let's talk about the 4K recording modes on this camera. And the really good news here is that the readout speed is incredibly fast. We're looking at 8 milliseconds to read out the 4K capture on this, which means rolling shutter will almost never be a problem. The downside is, in order to achieve this, it looks like they're not using all the pixels on the sensor. It is full width, but you can see it is a fairly soft image and basically the same level of detail that we saw with the previous A7R5. So to show you what I'm talking about here, I've put the 8K footage in a 4K timeline side by side with the 4K footage that this camera captures, and you can see it is a much more detailed image if you just shoot 8K and put that in a 4K timeline. This is a bit of a drawback because if you compare it to cameras like the Canon R5 II or the Nikon Z8, those are giving you very sharp, oversampled 4K recording that honestly puts this to shame a little bit. If you're planning to primarily shoot 4K video, I would look at the less expensive A7 IV, which actually has a more detailed image, and it costs way less money. Another feature I was thrilled to see on this is the aforementioned 4K 120 recording, which was not available on the A7R5. And here I was impressed to see that the detail is very similar to what we're seeing in the standard 4K record mode. So not a big loss in sharpness. There is unfortunately a bit of a crop when you're using this mode, but honestly, I'm just happy to see it. So an area where Sony has just been excelling lately is in terms of the video autofocus. The A7R6 is no exception to this rule. I just find it very sticky, almost never wobbles off your subject, and does smooth transitions from one subject to another. The one thing Sony has struggled with is stabilization, and honestly, I still find we get that classic Sony look where it's pretty bouncy when you're walking and talking like this. So now Chris has switched over to dynamic active stabilization. You can see it really smooths things out. This wasn't available on the A7R5, but it does incur a very heavy crop, which is going to further degrade your image quality. I just really wish Sony could step up their game with their standard uncropped stabilization to something like what Panasonic is doing with their uncropped video stabilization that is still best in class. Speaking of Panasonic, Sony did take one little trick from their playbook, which is now you can capture 32-bit float audio, but unfortunately you do have to use the XLR attachment handle in order to access that, same as Panasonic, but Nikon's been able to do it without an external attachment. But there's other stuff Panasonic does that I would love to see Sony implement, things like waveforms, things like open gate recording, and importantly, internal RAW recording, which is something Sony's not offering on any of their alpha cameras. As well, a lot of competitive Panasonic cameras have active cooling, which is something the Sony lacks, and because it's May in Canada, I can't do an extreme overheating test, but in controlled room temperature environments, using the most demanding modes, talking 8K 30 and 4K 120, I was able to record over an hour without any overheat warning showing up on screen, so the thermals on this seem excellent. But the main thing here is, unlike the A7R5, I consider this a camera that could absolutely be used in professional applications. And yes, there are some real drawbacks in both 8K and 4K recording. And the thing that really concerns me is, I don't think these are sensor limitations from what I'm seeing. It seems to be a bit of a processing bottleneck. And the problem here is this debuts a brand new processor that we're going to be using probably quite a bit going into the future. So that's pretty disappointing to see that that seems to be what's holding this camera back. But you know what? I know Chris is itching to use this camera to take pictures instead of film me, so let's go do some of that.
Okay, so let's start answering some of these questions that we had at the start. And I'm gonna begin with mechanical shutter and the dynamic range that's involved there. I mean, first off, I wanna get across the Sony a7R5, amazing dynamic range, no complaints. Love that sensor, love the ability to push shadows, but we did a comparison here. And so as you can see here, I mean, we start with both photos heavily underexposed. We boost both up quite extreme. And what you're gonna notice here is that the a7R6's shadows just have that little bit of extra detail. I did not expect to see that, but we are getting a dynamic range improvement over the older a7R5. You know, when you add on top of this just the fact that the a7R6's mechanical shutter is more useful when shooting 10 frame per second bursts because you're not losing that lossless compressed capability in RAW mode, this just makes this even better than what was already a fantastic camera. But it doesn't end there. We also have to talk about electronic shutter because this is now a stacked CMOS chip and we're getting faster readout speeds. Is the electronic shutter now usable compared to the a7R5, which honestly wasn't? Well, yeah, I mean, okay. So first off, let's just talk about DR because we're still in that topic. You'll notice there's a slight hit to the dynamic range when you go from the mechanical shutter to the electronic shutter on the Sony a7R6. But I think as we've established, DR is great regardless. I mean, I wouldn't even worry about it. I don't think twice about it. It's awesome. But what about rolling shutter, okay? The a7R5 had approximately sort of like 1/10 of a second or about 100 milliseconds. I mean, you would get these hard diagonals as you can see here. But now look at the Sony a7R6 in comparison. We're getting much faster 18 millisecond readout speed. That's covering the sensor in approximately 1/60th of a second. And you can see here that the rolling shutter is vastly reduced. Is it gone completely? No. And we're going to talk about that later, but compared to the a7R5, we've got a huge improvement here, and it makes those 30 frame per second bursts absolutely more usable if you want to get into sports, action, and wildlife and still shoot that. So straight up, for the kind of photography that I like to do personally outside of the job, the Sony a7R5, one of my favorite cameras, really. I mean, I love the high resolution. Even if I don't need it all the time, it's nice to have it there. The autofocus is fast and reliable. So I really enjoyed it. What it couldn't do is go into wildlife, sports and stuff, but that's not really my jam on a regular basis. As a street photography camera, great. But now having used the Sony a7R6, I mean, this feels incredibly familiar. Other than the slightly larger grip, the controls are exactly where I remember they are. The menu system's basically the same. And I'm getting all the stuff that I love about the a7R5. In fact, it's all even better. I mean, higher resolution, better dynamic range, slightly improved autofocus. These are all nice bonuses, but the electronic shutter and just the faster readout really opens this up as a camera that I could absolutely use for some wildlife, some action, and some sports photography in a really usable way. I mean, having things like pre-capture, these are small changes, but they really make a big difference to this camera, and it really makes this camera incredibly versatile for so many different kinds of photography. And I feel like this is just another perfect example of Sony exerting its sensor dominance over the market. I mean, as far as high resolution cameras go, when compared against its contemporaries like the Nikon Z8, the Canon R5 Mark II, the Panasonic S1R2, which are all fantastic cameras, this is giving us 20 megapixels of resolution over those sensors. And look, I'm not a megapixel whore. I'm not saying you absolutely have to have it. 45 is great, 45 is plenty, but 20 extra megapixels is nothing to sniff at. I mean, it's a serious and significant improvement for the people that are going to use it to crop or maybe print incredibly large. And even the price on this camera, I mean, yes, it's an expensive camera, but frankly, it's in line with the pricing that we saw when the a7R5 came out, when the other contemporary cameras all came out. I mean, this is a pretty appropriate price given what this camera can do. And so then what's our last question? Well, how does this compare to the Sony A1 version 2? Is this making that camera obsolete? Is it replacing it? Is there a lot of crossover? No, I don't think it is making the camera obsolete, but let's give you guys some context. So the Sony A1 II, for a long time, that was seen as the high-resolution do-it-all camera because it could tackle any kind of photography, great sensor, good dynamic range, amazing autofocus. I mean, the Sony A1 II still has technological capabilities that this camera can't touch. It's got a much better, more sophisticated mechanical shutter that can go up to that 400th of a second maximum sync speed with Sony flashes. This camera can't really do that. The electronic shutter is going to still read out 5 times faster. You can rely on that electronic shutter to do things like fast action sports, clouds, birds in flight, golf swings, all this kind of stuff, and not see any strange rolling shutter. Here, this camera is going to handle a lot of situations like that in electronic shutter mode. But from other cameras we've tested that have similar readout speeds, yeah, you're still going to get baseballs in flight that look a little bit wonky, or wings and golf clubs swinging that just still have a strange bend to them, just a little bit. It's way better than the A7R5 was, but this is still not going to compete with the A1 II. What it does make the Sony A1 II is a more specialized tool for now that specific kind of photography, journalism, sports, action, wildlife. But this camera is now insanely more versatile for way less money and giving you much higher resolution. So if the Sony A1 II was the advanced do-it-all camera, I would argue that this is now the real do-it-all camera from Sony. Well, I appreciate you guys sticking around this long. I mean, this was absolutely a long video, but there's a lot to talk about on this very exciting camera. Definitely leave your comments below and give us the feedback. We always love to have those discussions. I also think this camera is going to spurn further discussions we're going to have on the channel. Things about like, have cameras plateaued? Where do we go from here? I think this actually does bring up a lot of interesting points for that conversation. So stay tuned, make sure you subscribe and don't miss that stuff. Do also check out the PetaPixel podcast. It's on this exact same channel, or you can listen to it on all your favorite podcasting apps, and also consider supporting us with a PetaPixel.com membership. You're going to get all these great benefits. It's only $3 a month or $30 a year, and it really helps us do some really cool special projects. Thanks for joining us, guys. We'll see you soon with more on PetaPixel.